Welcome to episode 35 of the Tax Professionals podcast. In this episode, Bill Dodwell, Tax Director of the Office of Tax Simplification, joins us for the first official episode of Tax Career Success Secrets, where high-achieving tax professionals share the secrets behind career success.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Bill started his tax career over 40 years ago. His roles have included being Deloitte's Head of Tax Policy to now being the Office of Tax Simplification's Tax Director, Editor-in-Chief of Tax Advisor magazine, and a member of the GAR Advisory Panel. Bill is a prime example on how to achieve senior roles and success whilst remaining humble, down-to-earth, and retaining integrity. And in this episode, he provides an insight into his tax career as well as his advice and tips to help you achieve success in your own career. The first 20 minutes are an overview of Bill's career before moving on to what it means to be Deloitte's Head of Tax Policy. At around 23 minutes, we discuss the value of becoming ATT and CTA qualified before speaking about the qualities of a good tax advisor at around 25 minutes. Around 31 minutes in, Bill gives advice on dealing with mistakes or errors which are inevitable as part of a tax career, and then Bill shares his view on the most important skills to be a partner at around 39 minutes. The episode then finishes off with Bill's 3 tips to help you to progress, develop and improve your tax career at around 48 minutes. The timings just mentioned are detailed in the details of the episode in your podcast app or in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP35. TTPP35 just stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast episode 35. So this is the first official episode of Tax Career Success Secrets, after receiving some great feedback on episode 29 with Ray McCann, ex-AOT President. I've got loads more lined up for you, and it would be great to hear your thoughts on these episodes or anyone else you'd like to feature in the series. You can message me on LinkedIn, Jack Bonehill, or via email at jack@thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com. Make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes of the podcast that will help you to progress, develop and improve your tax career by subscribing or signing up for email notifications at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe. The email notifications will give you a brief summary of each episode so that you can decide if you want to listen. Episodes are bi-weekly and are released on Mondays. Without further ado, let's get to it. Would you start then by giving a brief summary of your tax career?
Hello, I'm Bill Dodwell. I'm currently the Tax Director of the Office of Tax Simplification. And let me start with sort of right at the back at the beginning. How did I ever get involved in tax? When I was about 15, for some weird reason, I decided I wanted to be a solicitor. I can't explain why. My father was a civil engineer. My mother was a teacher and homemaker, as was sort of appropriate for the time, if you like. But anyway, I had this idea that law was the thing for me, and so that led to me picking the A levels I did, and I eventually went to King's College London to study law, which was fantastic. And some of the friends I met there, are still great friends now. And, today we've got WhatsApp groups, obviously slightly different in the sort of late 70s, it's fair to say. After I'd done that degree, which I really enjoyed and really got me thoroughly into the whole practice and joy of law, I decided I didn't want to be a solicitor after all. The bar was the thing. So I started eating dinners at Middle Temple, which was brilliant for meeting a range of people involved in the law. But again, somehow, and I can never explain it, I thought tax might be interesting. So I went to Queen's College, Cambridge, and did a 1-year master's in law, which was essentially 4 subjects, one of which was tax. And I went to Queen's because at the time, John Tiley was the lead lecturer in tax. He subsequently was promoted to professor. And he was a brilliant guy to teach, to learn from, a great teacher. He also wrote one of the leading books, which is still around. It's now, adopted by David Collison, so it's Tiley and Collison. But he sort of set out this fantastic framework for learning about tax. And that's where I learned about things, the fruit and the tree, that sort of concept of, the capital, the tree, the thing that, lasts for a long time, and the fruit, the income, that sort of is grown on the tree during the year, and you sell or eat or whatever is appropriate for you. And that and all sort of other things were brilliant. And it was then tax for me, but I couldn't afford to go to the bar. At that time you had to very much pay for the privilege. I think it's much better now. There are many more scholarships and other things available to help you into the program. And I was also advised by a great friend of mine that actually the best place for tax was one of the leading accounting firms. So I joined a firm called Arthur Andersen. At the time, there was a Big Eight. That was before all the mergers and other things that led to today's Big Four. And so I joined that thinking, I'd work for sort of 3 or 4 years, earn some money, and then go off to the bar. And of course, I never did. I really enjoyed it. And the thing I really enjoyed was working in a team. And that was the biggest single thing, because obviously if you go to the bar, you're a sole practitioner. Of course, you have other members of chambers, but, to some extent, you're even competing with some of them. Although you possibly don't see it quite like that. But nonetheless, the team working was really great. And I decided to stay. It was most enjoyable. It was simple as that. And I was eventually promoted to partner. And there we are. And it's just just one of the differences between then and now. Then I was promoted to partner at sort of when I was about 33, I think it was. And there were 17 tax partners, all of whom sat around a table in a meeting room and had lunch once a month. And today, of course, today's partners in the large firms, particularly, you're lucky if you become a partner before you're about 40, I would guess. And of course, you haven't just got 17 partners, you've probably got several hundred partners. And, the transformation in the scale of the firms in response, of course, to business need has really been one of the sort of great things that's happened throughout my tax career. Now, some of you, if you're students of ancient history, will know that Arthur Andersen came to a sorry end in 2002. Essentially, the US audit firm was part of a significant audit scandal. And so it disappeared. And of course, that meant that all the other firms in the network had to find somewhere else to join up, because you couldn't be an international tax advisor, as I was, if you hadn't got a US arm, because the US at the time was, probably still is, the largest economy in the world, and the most significant to those of us in the UK, because so many US companies invest in the UK. So anyway, the UK arm of Arthur Andersen joined Deloitte, and that's how I ended up at Deloitte. I joined the tax policy group there, and that meant over time that my client work shrunk in size, although I was still doing client work even when I retired from the firm in 2018. In 2005, I was appointed head of tax policy at Deloitte, which was a really enjoyable role. And again, one of the other then and now differences, when I started, I did income tax, I did US income tax, I did corporation tax, I even did a bit of VAT. And the hardest subject was inheritance tax, because it was really hard to get practice in sort of doing that. Today, everyone will know that when you join one of the firms, you end up becoming a corporate specialist or a personal tax specialist or an employment specialist. And that's also great. And it's response to the call for greater specialization. It's a response to the way everything has developed over time more generally. But it does mean you didn't have the sort of breadth of tax coverage that I had. And after starting with that, I moved solely into corporate tax eventually. But moving to the tax policy role meant that I sort of got back involved with other taxes as well, and that's been really helpful. It's helped me get a much better perspective about the tax in the UK more generally. So as I say, I retired from the firm at the end of 2018. May 2018. Everyone probably knows that there are sort of retirement term limits, if you like, in all the partnerships generally, and my time was up. They actually got an extra year, which was very generous of the head of tax to allow that. so, I wasn't ready to give up on tax or retire in that sort of sense. So I looked around and I applied to become a member of the advisory panel for the GAR, the General Anti-Abuse Rule. And I was appointed to that. I could only do that once I was no longer a Big Four tax partner, because for appearance of conflict cases, we couldn't have somebody who was active in one of the leading firms generally. So I got that. I also applied to become a team member at the Office of Tax Simplification. And I was appointed to that as well. I was extremely pleased and very grateful that they took a chance on me, if you like. And a few months after I joined, because it takes some time to join the OTS. The reason is you have to get a security pass to get into the Treasury building, which is where we work. But anyway, a few months after I'd actually joined, the tax director, Paul Morton, decided he was going to resign from the post to do a range of other things and reduce the level of some of his work involvements generally. And so I applied for the job as tax director, was appointed in 2019. And the other thing I'd just add is that I was introduced to the Chartered Institute of Tax. I've been a member for a long time. Arthur Anderson was one of the firms that very strongly encouraged people to do the CTA exams as well as the chartered accountancy ones that were practically compulsory for all of us. So I did those, and that was helpful. But I started to get involved with the Institute at the encouragement of a former president, John Cullinane. And so I joined the International Tax Subcommittee, as it was called, and helped with that. One of the sort of team of volunteers, as we've known, people in practice essentially, whose job was to essentially comment on draft legislation, proposals, put forward issues that we found in practice that we thought HMRC should deal with. And then after that, I joined the technical committee, the overarching committee, and was appointed chair of that. And then after a sort of certain amount of time, I then became the Chartered Institute of Tax president, which again was a great job to do. And it, again, like tax policy, like the OTS role, it put me in much more contact with the wide variety of tax practice we actually have in the UK. So, most of the people I were meeting were working for smaller firms, so-called high street firms. They might be sole practitioners or, people practicing in a one-office firm. And that was, again, really, really great experience, and very glad to meet so many people who were really putting a huge amount of effort into helping everybody in the UK do business in a sort of sensible and appropriate manner. Because most people set off in business because they've got a business idea or they've got a skill. Most people don't do it because they want to do their bookkeeping, their accountancy, and their tax. And that's where tax professionals come in. So that sort of brings me today, where we at the Office of Tax Simplification, our job really is to provide advice to government on how to improve the UK's tax position more generally, how to make it easier for everybody to interact with our tax system. And, you read plenty of stuff. It is a complicated thing, and that's why tax advisors, I think, will be in demand for many years to come. And I don't think we're about to be taken over by artificial intelligence or anything like that either, although we'll no doubt use it in our practice more generally. But it's that interface between, the complications of business, whether it's large or small business, and the complications of the tax system. That's where the tax advisor, the tax agent sits, and that's why they've got a really valuable role.
Yeah, I just think it sounds like you've had such an interesting and varied career. I've got so many different questions that I want to ask, but I'm never going to have time to ask all of them. So I'm going to try and keep it focused on what I think is probably the most interesting ones. So what actually made you want to work for the OTS then in particular over other opportunities that you may have had at the time?
Well, I think the real challenge, the real joy challenge of the OTS is that it has a sort of unique position. We're the only country to have an Office of Tax Simplification, and we're sort of partly in government, partly out of government, if you like. We work in the Treasury building. That's where I've been working today, hence the tie, if you can see that. But we're a mixture of public and private sector people. So it's a mixture of people from the Treasury and HMRC, and people such as me from practice, one or two people from business. And it's that variety, I think, that helps us pull forward some decent recommendations for how we might, as a matter of practice, make the tax system easier for everybody to deal with. Our focus is on individuals, whether they're in business or, domestically, if you want to put it that. So, if you're a large multinational, it's great if we can simplify your life too, because costs, even at a large multinational level, should always be reflected on and taken account of. But we're trying to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people, and that's why the sort of focus on the individual more generally. And the opportunity, it followed from the work I'd sort of done in tax policy at Deloitte, where our job at Deloitte was, a combination of knowing what was going on, contributing to the development of tax policy by the Treasury and HMRC, and conveying all of that to, firstly to the Deloitte internal team so they could tell their clients, and also directly to, clients at large. So, this was a sort of natural step, and luckily, I managed to get that role, and the sort of timing worked out because there's not many of these jobs around. It's fair to say.
Well, yeah, there's only one tax director of the OTS.
Yes. I mean, obviously, you could have gone and worked for one of the professional bodies, and John Cullinane, who I mentioned before, was a Deloitte partner and a former Anderson partner as well, just as I was. And he's now the Director of Public Policy at the Chartered Institute of Tax. And so that's, that's another sort of role to do after practice.
Yeah. And I think, to be fair, the Office of Tax Simplification is such a need in the UK. I mean, we all know how many yellow books there are and how many orange books there are on top of that as well. It's just amazing how much tax legislation there is, and I imagine we're an exception compared to some other countries in that, as it just seems so much more complicated than other countries.
I'm not sure we're much worse than large developed economies, to be fair. I think the country with the most complicated tax system is the United States. But, we're sort of fortunate in that we essentially have one tax system for the UK. In the United States or in Germany or Switzerland or something like that, you've got to consider not only federal tax, but state tax generally, or, cantons in Switzerland or the Länder in Germany. And that sort of adds to the complexity generally. But I do think one of the big factors of complexity is the complications of business. When I started, I actually remembered when exchange control was abolished. And exchange control was, you had to ask permission if you wanted to invest overseas. And so one of the first jobs I did as a very brand new person was help draft some of those applications for clearance. And it probably sounds, crazy to you and to many people listening, that you'd have to ask permission to invest in another country. But there was a time when you needed to do that. And fortunately, when the UK got rid of that requirement, and, business globalized at a sort of huge rate of knots. And, there's lots of other stats you can use around that. Many years ago, pension funds would almost exclusively be invested in the UK. Today, I believe the average pension fund has more than half its assets outside the UK. And for those of us who, are potential pensioners, that's probably a good thing, because you're spreading your risk, on a global basis. And given the scale of the UK, we're a big country, but when you're in the context of the globe, we're quite small. It's a good thing to take advantage of all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. I'm also interested to hear a bit more about what it what the role of being head of tax policy actually entails. I think you mentioned it a bit. Obviously, you're involved in tax policy, but what does that actually mean on a day-to-day basis?
In a professional firm, I think it sort of you can define how you wanted to do it. The group that I was appointed to lead in Deloitte did a mixture of knowledge management, tax training, tax technical training, and essentially representations to government, responding to consultation documents and that sort of thing. And that's not just the UK government, of course. We would also get involved with the EU and with the OECD. So, I made lots of trips to Paris with colleagues to discuss various of the actions under the well-known base erosion and profit shifting project, the BEPS project. That took place. So it's really trying to sort of combine those sort of things, discovering what was going on so that you were able to pump out that news straight away. Because, one thing we all know about tax is it's constantly changing. And of course, we normally have one Finance Act a year. We have had years when we've had more than one, of course, and we normally only have one budget. But of course, we've had years with more than one of those too. But then you've got a myriad of other changes, whether it's changes in the UK, tax cases coming out, new statutory instruments, for example, implementation of a policy that was announced a long time ago that is now tomorrow taking effect, for example, all of that. And then you throw in the international side that is relevant to, so many UK-based businesses generally. And people need to know that fairly soon, and they need a sort of strategy for how to manage all of that today.
Yeah. So when you say then knowledge management, is that making sure that I suppose all the staff have the requisite level of tax knowledge and making sure they're updated, trained, and I suppose have a consistent...
So we manage the databases that, the moment something happens, we would plonk it in the database. So if a case came out, if there was a legislative announcement, whatever it was, something from the EU, we'd plonk it immediately in the database. And so that anybody could know about it and read it. And we would then, where appropriate, analyze it as well. We had, enough technical people in the team that we could do quite a bit of that ourselves. Obviously, for particular areas, we'd go to the practice because there were, we couldn't possibly know everything. Nobody can these days. And then I actually, one of the sort of benefits and burdens I had was I was asked to write an email every day to the tax practice. In the end, it turned out to be 4 days a week on the basis nothing happened over the weekend. And so it was called Tax AM, and it sort of was my take on what was going on in the world of tax, and was intended to both inform and entertain, and I enjoyed writing that for the time.
So that kind of makes sense as to why you now are editor-in-chief of Tax Advisor, and if you like that element of the role.
I do. There's multiple things. I've got a huge amount of respect for the Chartered Institute of Taxation and its associated body, if you like, the Association of Taxation Technicians. And I'd encourage everybody to take the exams of those two bodies. They're tax specialists, and they give you a really important grounding in tax. If you've got those qualifications, one or both of them, or whatever's appropriate for you, you've actually done something practical, and I think that's a really good thing, because the exams are not just sort of airy-fairy, ethereal stuff. They're grounded in real-life practice, and they're also really helpful because they don't just look at one subject. They have a sort of certain breadth to them, and that's also good for all of us in the job we do, I think. So I very much encourage that. But you can see my sort of affection for the institute generally. So it was great to, the job of being the editor-in-chief, essentially it's the technical editor, if you like, of the magazine, came available, and I thought that'd be brilliant to do. And, it doesn't take up very much time in the week, but it sort of means with my other jobs that essentially I'm full-time, but not working as hard as you had to as a Big Four partner, is probably fair to say, or a high street practitioner, working through the all the deadlines that all of us in tax have to face.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you about doing the ATT and CTA. I felt like for me, it's given me such a strong foundation for, I suppose, building upon and developing my career. And as you say, it's not just the tax knowledge that you learn. You do learn quite a lot of practical skills from it as well, particularly with the CTA, how to write a piece of advice that is beneficial to a client that they're actually going to want to pay for, rather than just something that you want to write, which I think is a nice distinction.
I think that's exactly right. And, sometimes one of the questions that we all get faced with is, so what are the qualities of a good tax advisor? And I think, depending on the role you do, the ability to get on well with people is really, really important. Because you're an influencer. You're not the person who's determining what the business is going to do or what the individual is going to do, for example, on planning their estate, if you like. You're there to advise. So you need to be able to communicate well, generally, and practice on all of that. So command of sort of English and whatever is good. I also think that a level of numeracy, arithmetic is important. You're not mathematical at all. It's auditors who have to do statistical analysis generally. And that's valuable for their profession. But in our job as a tax advisor, what we're doing is we're taking something complicated, tax law, we're trying to understand what it means and translate it into concepts that our clients can relate to in their business or personal lives. So we take the complex and simplify it, and we give the client advice on, what the financial implications of all of that might be. And that is a really sort of important thing. So trying to take that sort of logic, arithmetic level to bind with, those communication skills, those I think are what make a good tax advisor more generally. And you've got to enjoy the change of it. The law really is, and practice really does change every week, and you've got to enjoy all of that. And then the final thing is you've got to get to know your client's business. And you're not a business person, but you're a tax specialist generally. But if you don't understand what the client is up to, what their real objectives are, and what the sort of drivers of their business are, then you won't give such good tax advice. And so that's why getting to know their business is great. And it's led to, that's been a really fascinating thing for me. I had a fantastic tour around a cake factory once and discovered how lots and lots of cakes were made because we were trying to look at the capital allowance position for all the machinery, and discovering the sort of the level of skill and innovation in making cakes is really quite remarkable, as well as discovering that mince pies were sent off to Australia in August in a refrigerated ship, so as to arrive there in time for Christmas.
Yeah, I think it's particularly for people who are early on in their career, I think it's easy to neglect understanding the client's business and almost wanting to apply a one-size-fits-all tax solution to problems. And it just doesn't work like that, does it? I mean, I was definitely guilty of it earlier on in my career as well, but they're not just driven by the tax position, are they, businesses? They've also got commercial factors that they need to consider as well.
Absolutely. The way to make money out of business is to focus on your sales and your costs, and not to focus on your tax position so much. Tax obviously is one of the biggest costs the business bears, so it has to be managed in that sense. But that's not how you grow. Managing your tax isn't how you grow a business. So those of us in tax need to sort of understand our job is to help our clients succeed in what they're doing. But the overarching thing is for them to carry on the business that they know and develop, and our job is to see what the sort of tax issues are and what they potentially could be, and the various alternatives available to that business.
Yeah, and I think as long as an advisor you bear that in mind, then you're going to be able to give the client a good piece of advice. Whereas if you neglect that, then I imagine the client's going to come away pretty dissatisfied.
Well, you won't have given them something sufficiently relevant to them, will you? because it doesn't, they've got to see, so how could I do that in my business? And the other important thing when it comes to giving advice is your job is not to tell the client what to do, by and large. Your job is to present the various alternatives. And yes, you may be asked which is a better alternative, but it's important that your client understands enough about the position that they're able to make the choice themselves. Because that way they will sort of, it's their business, it's their profits, it's all those sort of things. It's not yours as the advisor, and therefore you need to explain enough to them in a manner that they can follow and relate to whatever their activities are to help them make those choices, of course.
So I imagine over the course of your career then some challenges have cropped up here and there. Have you got one that kind of sticks out to you as the biggest or one of the biggest? And could you tell us a little bit about that and how you've overcome it?
I think one of the things all of us have to get used to is that it's possible we could make a mistake. And, our lives are really complicated. Often we're under a lot of pressure too. And it's possible to get something wrong. And working out how to deal with that is a sort of, I think, an important skill for all of us in whatever we're trying to do. And I think there's a number of, things we'd all learn from that. I mean, the most important thing is to talk to someone about it, to, get someone else's opinion. Could this actually be an error? Because you find in all these situations that it's good to get multiple people involved who can help resolve whatever the scenario is. And, there's a whole range of different possible solutions to all of that. And occasionally there's some things that just can't be solved. It's just gone wrong. And, maybe you actually, your firm actually needs to make a payout or something like that, or whatever it turns out to be. But more often than not, quick action to thinking, could this have gone wrong? Discussing with others can help work out, suitable answers so that you end up with something that comes all right in, fairly soon. And I think that's it's a really worrying time, because none of us like to think we could have got something wrong. But thinking actually, maybe it could be having that sort of honesty with yourself that says that possibly wasn't the best, and then talking to somebody else about it and trying to get multiple answers, as I say, around finding solutions. And you often will find solutions through all of this, including that perhaps it wasn't a mistake after all, but you never know with this stuff. So it's that I think is one of the most challenging times when that happens. If you're one of the people approached, then your real job is to be constructive and not judgmental, because the person who's come to talk to you about it will be feeling terrible, as I can imagine all of us think we would be. And so our job is not to say you idiot. Our job is to try and be constructive, try and examine things forensically and carefully, and find answers to that. So I think that would be my description of a challenging situation, and the advice I'd try and encourage people to manage their way out of it in an appropriate way.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you picked up on that point, actually, because when I was speaking to Ray McCann probably about a month or two ago now, he picked up on the exact same thing. And it's so hard, isn't it, to admit when you've made a mistake. And then coming back to what you said about be constructive when they come to you, it must be so hard for that individual to come to you in the first place and tell you that there's made a mistake. That's honourable thing, isn't it? It's the right thing to do, and you want to encourage that behaviour. So, of course, being working with them to come up with something constructive and solving it rather than beating them around the head with a stick is obviously the best thing to do in that situation, isn't it?
For sure, absolutely. And the one thing that you must never do is show a lack of integrity or lack of honesty. Because if that's the case, the consequences are so much worse. You can make a mistake and recover from it. What you can't easily recover from is a lack of integrity or a lack of honesty. So never be tempted to cover something up or deal with it in that sort of way. Be open and straightforward, including whatever painful conversation that might eventually be with the client, or with your boss, frankly. But overall, that will always be best for you, the person. Be best for everybody involved in all of that.
Yeah, agreed completely. So
it's very easy to say. It's much harder.
It is, yeah, completely. yeah, it is. The thing is, though, when you leave a mistake, it can just accumulate anyway. So if you've given a piece of advice where there's a tax liability accumulating by the day, the longer you leave that, the bigger the liability is, the bigger the potential payout is for the firm. So it's just not in anyone's interest, is it, to leave it? So I'm sure over the course of your career that you've received many pieces of advice from different people. Is there a particular piece of advice that you've received that you remember as just being like a great piece of advice that's just kind of stuck with you for a long time? And could you tell us a bit about this, please?
I think the most important thing I would suggest is to try and identify what sort of person you are and where your core skills are, and look to work with other people who can bring other different skills. I used to do an awful lot of work with a particular individual. He was a partner and I was a manager, and then I became a partner as well. And we continued to work together. And always, he was the sort of person who would happily give me advice, even when I was a partner and in theory, working alongside rather than working for him, if you like. And receiving that advice was always a really good thing. And the good thing we discovered was that we got different skills, and that matching the two together often helped reach a sort of better overall answer. He was a brilliant negotiator, and I'm less good in that sort of area. So if we had something complicated that required negotiation, the best thing I could do was ask if he would come and help in all of that. My sort of skill, if you like, was technical analysis on something, and we would discuss things in that sort of area, and my job, if you like, would be to contribute that sort of skill I had more generally. So it's trying to work with a team where we have a range of different skills that each of us is bringing, and today we call it a diverse team, and I think that is really important. You can all think of examples of teams that aren't very diverse, and what you end up with is not necessarily getting on sufficiently well with a client, because you're all, you, the advisory team, are all in the same sort of mold and you're all going down the same direction, and the client's actually a bit different. Whereas if you take that diverse team to your client, even if you, the individual, aren't the best person to relate to that particular client, someone else in the team might well be. And we really gain from all of that. So trying to build those diverse teams that I think we now have the opportunity, if you like, that possibly didn't exist when I started out. That is a huge thing to do, and it's really important that we take advantage of that more generally, I would say.
Yeah. So by the sounds of it then, because you were obviously a partner, and it sounds like your kind of stronger area was the technical side of tax and doing the analysis, etc. And I imagine this other person you're referring to as well was also a partner, strong in negotiation.
Yes, he was actually a more senior partner than me.
Okay. So obviously that goes to show that you can be a partner and have different skill sets. Do you still think that's possible today, or do you think the world's moved on?
I think it's absolutely the way things are today. And I think it's the way things used to be too, but we possibly didn't recognize it so much. Whereas I think we're better at recognizing it today. But that's the importance of teamwork, and diversity in the team. If you're a guy, don't end up taking a team of guys all who are just like you. End up mixing it up a bit. We know that that's perfectly possible to do. And it's really important because you don't know who's going to get on well with the client, as I say, who's got that rapport, who's got to, the emotional intelligence to work with the decision makers on the client more generally. And it might not be you, or me, it might be somebody else. And we've got to sort of think, actually, what's the best thing for the client?
Yeah, I think having a whole team of me would be the worst thing ever, because it would be a very stubborn team, and we'd be arguing with each other all the time.
and it's the same with me, and for sure, it's the same with all of us if we sort of think about it that way. But one of the pressures of professional life is that you're trying to do things yourself, if you like, because that's important to how you get on. In some cases, how you're remunerated, all that sort of thing. And well, it took me a little while to discover this, but I have discovered the fact is, if you work with really great people, you will have a really great outcome yourself. And helping people, giving them the opportunity is actually a really good thing for you, and not just for them. You benefit possibly even more than they do through all of that.
Yeah, which I suppose is a hard thing to do when you're younger and you think you're the best at everything. I suppose being a bit humble and accepted. Yeah,
and you're paranoid
true,
because you want to become partner, so they need you to demonstrate a business case. So you've got to be able to say, "Oh, I've got these fees, or this client wants to come to me." And actually, if you were out on your own, they probably wouldn't come to you. They might, depending on the nature of the business and all that sort of thing. But often they want to come to you in a team, and it's important to remember that.
Yeah. So just on the topic then of like being a partner at the Big Four. So I'm sure there's many people out there that aspire to achieve that, some more earlier in their careers and others some further along. But if there's like just one piece of advice or the most important thing that people can do who want to become a partner, what do you think that thing is?
I think the distinguishing feature is you've got to show some leadership, and that requires that you be prepared to make tough decisions, not all of which are the most pleasant. But you've got to do that because that's the difference, if you like, between working in a team, which is, as I say, for me is a really real strength, and leading that team of people, because the point of the leader is to make some of those difficult decisions, as well as sort of sharing all the joy of success, which hopefully is much more often. So work out what that sort of leadership question is all about, and and I sort of think that until you've identified that, you're possibly not ready to step up to that sort of position. And shortly after you have become a partner, you will inevitably spend some time trying to do two jobs: the job you were doing as a director or manager beforehand, and the new job you've got as a partner, because you'll be convinced that only you can work to the sort of level and all that sort of stuff. And in part that's true, and in part that's no chance at all. It's just the only way you actually move forward is to trust your team, and to grow your team, and to realize that they need opportunities and they need decision making capacity just as you had it. And so, and you'll kill yourself if you try and do all that work.
Absolutely. I mean, you'd achieve burnout in probably a month.
Yes. And I think, one of the great things is, and I think one of the things we have to help manage with our clients generally is that, of course, meeting the client needs is really important, but the team doing it are people. And as you mentioned burnout, it's absolutely essential that your team doesn't burn out, that they do have real lives, and they're not, just working, if you like, that they have opportunities to go and do all the other things that life brings, and that you sort of help manage the client to just make sure that they don't suddenly want too much and sort of think that, some really people could just work through the night and it'll be ready at 8 a.m. the following morning. Well, you might do that once, but you can't consistently do that and, have it be successful, avoid mistakes, and, actually have the sort of decent life that I think all of us would like to do.
Yeah, I think if you were to keep doing that, before you know it, you wouldn't have a team left anymore. Particularly with the way I think the working world is going today, I think people much more appreciate or want a work-life balance nowadays. Maybe than.
But honestly, it's really important. You'll be a better, better person, better advisor with that work-life balance than if all you do is work.
Yeah, I agree. It's really nice to hear it actually from someone who's had such senior roles as well, because I preach it and I try and practice it as well. But it's nice to know that, you can still achieve senior roles and still have those views as well.
Well, I think you can, and I think it matters to all of us generally that, as I say, we've all got a sort of opportunity to enjoy life as well as work hard and contribute. And I don't think the two are mutually exclusive at all.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's all well and good, isn't it, earning a decent salary, but if you can't enjoy it and you've got a flashy car, but you sit in it feeling stressed when you're driving it, and what's the point?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think hindsight's a wonderful thing, and obviously knowing what you know now, I'm sure you would have approached some things differently, maybe in your career. So knowing what you know now, if you were to go back to your younger self and give yourself a piece of advice, what would that be?
I definitely think the work-life balance is something I would have benefited from giving myself advice. I worked really hard in the run-up to becoming a partner, because I was trying to sort of do two jobs, potentially the sort of quasi-partner role, even though I hadn't got that promotion, and the sort of, running all the director. Well, I was called a manager at the time, but director is probably what you'd be called today. So trying to do it in a manner that does acknowledge that work-life balance, I think is one of the important pieces of advice. As I say, it doesn't mean you don't work hard, but it does mean that you do really make sure you have some time off, you take your holidays, all that sort of thing, because that is such an important part of giving decent advice to people, to work with people in all of that. Yeah,
I think it's a good piece of advice. And so then kind of one last thought then for listeners who, since they're listening to the podcast, they tend to be people who want to progress and improve their career. So, if you were to give 3 of your top tips now to people in order to do that, what do you think they would be?
That's a terrific question. I think one of them is learn or practice public speaking. And because I think the skills that apply in public speaking are the same skills that actually work well when you're trying to deal with a client. The point of public speaking is to, obviously you have the nervousness of standing on a stage or that sort of thing, or even today in a Zoom call of all of that. What you're trying to do is, as I said earlier, take that complex legislation and guidance and practice stuff and turn it into something that is intelligible to the client, that you want to understand it so that they can make the most informed business choice for them. And public speaking is about that, I think. It's an element of taking that complex and breaking it down. It's an element of repetition in different ways, so that you say something once and then you say something in broadly similar terms, but something that isn't quite the same, so that if the client didn't quite understand it the first time round, they've got a second chance of doing it, because it is hard to get to grips with what people are saying and trying to put across, and through all of that, being open to questions and dealing with all of that is really important. So I do think public speaking skills are valuable for all of us, whether or not we're the people who, stand on a platform and speak in front of 300 or 400 people, or whether we're teaching our students a group of 10 or something like that, or whether we're dealing with 3 or 4 clients, and you're trying to, take that complex, break it down to simple, have repetition, don't have jargon, cut out, some of the unfortunate things that people can say. Never say the phrase, i.e., for example, e.g. Don't use a jargon. Don't talk about, a QROPS or something like that, because your client has no chance of following all of that. Just say the phrase over and over again. So even something that, I think in the international corporate world has made its way, BEPS, try not to do all of that. Try and talk about the base erosion and profit shifting project, because somebody who's not intimately involved will need that. So that's a really, really important thing, I would suggest. The next thing I would say is be comfortable and keep learning about technology. That was less of a case, when I was progressing. I learned about spreadsheets and that sort of thing. I learned how to write a decent spreadsheet that wasn't riddled with error, and how to build in self-checking mechanisms into that. And clearly there are some people doing modeling with spreadsheets, and all that same sort of analysis is just as appropriate. But actually, spreadsheets aren't the right answer for everything these days. And being more comfortable with how the technology works, what are the issues that could go wrong, what are the assumptions built in all of that, that I think is really important for people in general to get to grips with. Another thing I'd say is read the law. Read the actual statute, read the actual tax case. Don't rely on commentaries, because it's only by reading the law, and it's horrible when you start. It really is, but it's only by doing that you actually eventually get to understand how it works, how it's structured, what the what the sort of holes in it, frankly, are, and what are the risks from all of that more generally. So, do all of that for sure. I would say there's a whole load of other things. Working in a team is important. Being able to delegate is hugely important. Be able to give people good advice and a good evaluation. It's all too easy for, say, good. Firstly, do remember to tell people if they've done a good or a bad job fairly close to the event. It's really hard to do sometimes. But if you don't, then particularly if somebody needed some advice on something they could improve, they've lost the opportunity to learn from it. And so it's really important, if you're working with people, you do help them with that opportunity. And you only do that if you show them relatively close to the time how something might have been done better.
Yeah.
And when they can remember it, when they can see what those sort of different choices could have been. So that, I think, that's a really hard thing for us to do. We do find, all of us, learn about giving feedback, and it's all about being relevant close to the time. And all of us forget to do it like that, even though it is so important. And all I can echo is the importance of it, and just encourage you to do it as much as you reasonably can, because it will help the people you work with.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
Improving the people you work with will be fantastic for you and your career.
Yeah. There's two things you said that I'm big advocates of. The one is actually reading legislation, because I think so many people shy away from it because, as you say, it is very difficult to begin with, but it's the only way you're going to get the actual word of the law and then be able to see the different interpretations that exist in it and not someone else's opinion. And feedback, I'm also a very big advocate of, because I think it's the best way to learn. You've done something, you've had someone tell you how you could do it better or giving you some other ideas. It's such a rich source of information.
And, if you're the person working for somebody and they haven't given you feedback, pluck up the courage to ask.
Yeah.
And try and find a time when they won't just say, it was just fine, in a manner that's intended to sort of move you on.
Yeah.
You need to sort of push them a little bit on all of that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Bill, for your stories and the advice you're giving in this episode. It's much appreciated.
It's a great pleasure to be invited. So thank you again, Jack. And I very much enjoy it. And I hope everyone enjoys tax. I think it's a great career. I've been very, very fortunate in it. But through all of that, the love for tax is what keeps me very firmly involved in the tax world.
I hope you enjoyed the first official episode of Tax Career Success Secrets and are looking forward to future episodes too. The show notes for this episode are at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP35, which will include a link to Bill's LinkedIn profile, my free course to help you accelerate your tax career progression, and the Ray McKent episode, which I suppose is the first unofficial episode of Tax Career Success Secrets, for loss of a better word. There are 34 previous episodes of the podcast covering a variety of topics from tips to pass the ATT and CTA exams to how to improve your soft skills which are relevant to working in tax, such as writing tax advice. And you can access all of these episodes on your chosen podcast player or through the website, which is thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe or sign up for email notifications to make sure that you don't miss out on any future episodes that will help you to progress, develop and improve your tax career by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe. The emails will give you a brief summary of each episode, which are released bi-weekly on Mondays. But that's it for this episode. I hope you liked the episode and have taken away some useful points to help you to progress, develop and improve your tax career. Until next time.